Welcome, everyone, to episode 38 of the Single Malt Strategy Podcast. I am your host, John, the Strategy Wargamer, and I have a great episode for you guys today. I have Dan Lind, the game director of Hearts of Iron 4, as well as my co-host, Eric Tortuga. Welcome, guys. Welcome to this awesome episode, and how are you guys doing today?
Pretty good, pretty good. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have the game director of Hearts of Iron 4, the illustrious Hearts of Iron 4 that we all know and love. And yeah, I'm very anxious to just pick your brain at literally everything Hearts of Iron 4. So I think before we just dive into the meat of that, I wanted to kind of get a little of the background. I wanted to kind of dive into your history of strategy gaming. So before we begin, what were your favorite strategy games growing up?
Let's see. So the one that sticks out the most, I think the first Civilization is probably the one I played initially, because there wasn't a lot of other really big grand strategy games back then. I think I was very into RTSs for a while. The first Dune actually was Dune 2, because Dune 1 was like a side scroll, right? Played that quite a lot. This was back on Amiga and stuff like that.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and yeah, I'm starting to get old now.
I remember Dune 2, so you're in good company.
Yeah, and then I think like everybody else in my teens, I got really sucked into StarCraft and tried to play it a lot. There was just that entire period of my life was a lot of your RTSs what was it called? That one you have. The sequels are called Supreme Commander now, but there was.
Oh yeah.
What was the initial one? It's
Total Annihilation.
Yeah, the robot empires and stuff. And
that's right.
I'm honestly thinking maybe I got some inspirations for going more grand strategy with those, because they're the first RTSs that have sort of supply lines and stuff like that, right?
Hmm.
That was the game that kind of inspired you to start developing strategy games?
I think maybe it's the one we played a lot, and it actually felt more like a strategy game rather than who can click the fastest, which a little bit that StarCraft is, right? I mean, yeah, it's strategy too, but a lot of it is dexterity and stuff as well. But I was also hugely into tactical games. I played the XCOM games a lot. I like the new ones as well. Jag the Lions as well is another one.
So these were the first ones you were playing. When's the first time you started programming your own game? Did you do mods first, or how'd you enter the scene?
So let's see, what was I working on? When I started as a programmer primarily. The games I was working on was actually quite different, because I was also very much into space games. Mm-hmm. So I was sort of trying to develop my own kind of elite game. So a lot of very technical things like generating solar systems and planets and stuff like that. I was also starting off work on a kind of a multiplayer submarine kind of cat and mouse game as well.
Oh.
Before I started at Paradox. Oh yeah, I remember the game I was playing was which one could have been Anno 1400 maybe or something. Quite a bit before I started. The first Paradox game I played, though, was Hoi 2, I think.
Yeah, I remember the first time I actually picked up a Hearts of Iron game. I think I was on 34th Street in Midtown Manhattan. And I remember seeing it on the shelf, and I remember grabbing it and flipping the box, and I was just like, no way. I could not believe that you can play any nation in World War II, and just it for me at that time, I think this was the 90s. I think, and it was just so unbelievable, and that just kind of kicked off my love for Paradox. After that, it was just Victoria and then EU, and it was just, then I got lost, and 30 years later, I'm playing Hearts of Iron 4.
Yeah, I mean, the play any nation thing I think is part of our real core formula. So what kind of makes our games special? We don't really have AI nations that you can't play, stuff like that.
So Hearts of Iron had a long and illustrious history from Hearts of Iron 1. And I mean, if you're looking at it, Hearts of Iron 1, Hearts of Iron 2, Hearts of Iron 3, and then 4, you have major changes through each of them, from the graphics to actual things you can do to the amount of hexes. I remember when you guys went from Hearts of Iron 2 to Hearts of Iron 3, that was just like epic because I mean, I think it was like quadruple the amount of hexes. I mean, it was something ridiculous.
Yeah, I think we went from like, what was it, like 4,000 provinces to like 16,000 or something like that.
It was nuts. I remember it was awesome. I literally spent I think probably months, if not years, just playing that game and just calling out from work and calling out from school. It's like, yeah, I'm sick, and just make it a whole Hearts of Iron kind of day.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, when did and how did you become the director of Hearts of Iron 4? When did that whole project start kicking off?
So I'll go back all the way to like Hoi 3 development, I guess. So like during Hoi 3, I was one of the programmers. It was a very small team. I think we have like 3 programmers or something. Back then, everybody was sort of doing a little bit of everything as well, because we were a very small company, right? So you started off quite early doing design stuff even as a programmer.
Oh.
And when Hoi 3 released, I think Henrik Forius did the first expansion for it, and then I worked on the other ones. So that would be like For the Motherland and Finest Hour. On the first one, I think I was busy working on Victoria 2 at that moment, actually. But yeah, it's a while ago. So then for Hoi 4, I think Johan just came and goes like, Don, we should do a next Hearts of Iron, write the pitch, basically.
Well, how was the pitch? Like, did he just say, hey, we should just do the next Hearts of Iron?
Pretty much. And we discussed a couple of like kind of ground things that he wanted and I wanted and stuff like that. And for example, in Finest Hour, we added this thing with battle plans at the end, but they were just like a way to communicate with allies. So we wanted to see what we could take that from like making it into like a core playing thing. The way we did pitches back then was very much down to like what's the main focuses percentage-wise? You only have 100%. So like, where do we put the focus? And we felt like Hoi 3 had gotten too complicated and way too hard for people to get into. So we wanted to take a step back and like try to make a game that was a bit easier for people to learn and get into, and preferably without losing any complexity somewhere, right? So there's a lot of rethinking on features to try and have them easier to go into with more like long-term trade-offs kind of stuff. So, for example, things like the production lines and stuff try to encourage like more like sticking with your choices, stuff like that.
Well, I have to say that the production system. So I started Paradox Games with Hearts of Iron 2. I actually didn't know this, but I played Europa Universalis Rome when it came out, but I kind of forgot about Paradox after that for a while, and then came back to Hearts of Iron 2, unbeknownst to me, the same developer. Loved it. Loved Hearts of Iron 3. And one of the things I remember thinking about Hearts of Iron 3 is, wow, the production is done so convincing in this game. And then when Hearts of Iron 4 came, again, kind of blown away, actually. It was amazing to me that you both simplified it and also, in a way, made it more realistic. Like, those are things which don't normally happen. Usually you have to add complexity to make things more realistic. But so I think that it's probably the shining star for me in Hearts of Iron 4 is this production system, which is amazing, intuitive, feels realistic in every way. I actually want to know, how did you guys even come up with that? Did somebody have a mod for this at some point, or was this already an idea circulating in your brains from Hearts of Iron 3 or even 2?
It's hard to remember exactly when it popped up, but I had worked on Victoria for a while there, so my head was very much into the industry side of strategy. And for me, the interesting thing about Hoi 3 was always the big scope stuff, the production, the grand sweeps of plans and things like that, not necessarily the tactical micromanagement and stuff like that. And I've been reading a bunch of books about like how the different war industries worked, because like the German industry worked very different in a very confused and ad hoc manner, almost like compared to like say America, right? So I really wanted to capture that, to make countries play differently and have them make choices like this based on, things that would feel like they made sense, right? So Germany gets a lot of advantages to like keep improving its technology, stuff like that, right? It gets incentives, it gets like ahead of time research, stuff like that. So we wanted them to go with a more, I don't know, is the term like cottage industry, like the dispersed industry that we have, right, for them. But there needs to be trade-off still with your trade-offs, with your when you're going to switch out your lines and things like that. So I think it was something we were thinking about quite a long time. I wanted some sort of resistance to just like changing everything, right? I generally think like that a lot with systems when it comes to like the political side, and for me, like the production is almost political, like during a war, right? If you're thinking about Hitler micromanaging like the design of tanks and things like that a bit, I wanted to have sort of like a pushback on that, so that the player had like one extra factor to think about, but not necessarily a fact that it'd be really like complex to do, right? It's fairly easy to see like this is your efficiency and this is what's going to happen to it if you do change your choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So also another thing is like if you look at documentaries and stuff about like World War II, there's a lot of focus on these like new shiny German tanks, right? Everybody likes the Panther, and I always felt like the other side's tanks never really got enough credit, right? And a lot of it was because they aimed for good enough, right? And
Yeah.
focused on mass production. And I hadn't really seen a game that really focused on something like that before, so I wanted to have that choice, right? It's actually cool to play with a not top of the line tool. If that makes sense.
I really love besides the production, which I think is awesome, the way you kind of did that is just amazing. But the other thing that was a really shining star for this Hearts of Iron 4, which kind of blew my mind, was, like you guys mentioned before, was the technology system. Going from Hearts of Iron 3 to Hearts of Iron 4, it just felt right. Like you could literally go into it and just, it felt more streamlined, felt more clean. And you kind of have like a better idea where you want to go in terms of like this trees.
Yeah, I mean it's still pretty complicated, but what I felt with Hoi 3 was that we just had so many technologies, because every technology there had like a bunch of steps, right?
Mm-hmm.
That none of them really felt impactful at all. And the combination with like industry, right, where I want you to make a conscious choice if it's time to upgrade or not, really doesn't mesh well if you're getting like a new little tank upgrade like every month, right? So I think that sort of pushed onto the I want bigger techs that are more impactful and take a longer time to do.
What new feature in Hearts of Iron 4 did you feel like was a game changer compared to Hearts of Iron 3? I know we talked about technology, system, production, but do you feel like besides those two systems, any other thing that kind of you felt was that kind of game changer?
I would go with the planning, because it does mean that players can get into the game and do like a big offensive without having to get really good at microing, right? And at a high level, I mean, you're going to be microing stuff, but you can do pretty well with like high level plans. I think that was the other one. Otherwise, for me, like Hoi 4 is the like the industry Hearts of Iron game, like the one with the industry focus.
Well, to pick up on that, the front lines and all this stuff, I should, for background, I loved Hearts of Iron 3. I didn't mind pausing, spending about an hour setting out orders. I don't mind the minutia. But in Hearts of Iron, it's obviously there's a benefit to being able to appeal to more people, essentially. I mean, not everyone wants to spend an hour doing their order of battle like I would. So anyway, for the AI, though.
It's very hard to play a multiplayer game if you are required to pause to manage it right. And we wanted to see how far we could take Hoi 4 in that way as well. So that's why there's a lot less pop-ups, things like that.
Yeah, I think it's noticeable, right? A Hearts of Iron 3 multiplayer game would take many play sessions because people would have to play slow enough to essentially micromanage at like speed 1 or 2, you know? Yeah. And it's nice that that's kind of gone away.
I have people I know who play on basically speed 1 and actually ask me to lower the speed of speed 1. It's one of the good things about doing real time like we do, because you can play the game like you want it, right? You can have people who prefer microing every single unit in the Russian army, right? And then you play on the lowest speed, or you can have people go like, let's have a quick game, couple of hours, and you can do that as well. But then you need to play at a higher speed and accept that you're going to not have perfect movement everywhere, right? Because you have to delegate.
Yeah. So getting to this, I mean, essentially the player is kind of doing the same thing that AI is doing. We're both leaving our individual division control to an AI system. And that's what I wanted to ask you about, the AI progression in Hearts of Iron 4. I know that there's been some people who like look at these little hiccups. When we first started, there's the cycling of divisions along the front. There's right now this collapse of front lines when you take a province. There's cycling of garrisons on islands and stuff like this. I mean, AI is probably the hardest problem in any game. Yeah. So basically, I'm just curious. What were the end goals for your AI, or what are the biggest challenges that you've faced trying to accomplish? Essentially, an AI that can control things as well as a player might.
Yeah. So the idea and design for the AI, because I was very I think the Hoi 3 AI had a very good frontline combat AI. Did a pretty good job, but from a perspective of having the game be able to handle unforeseen stuff, Hoi 3 couldn't do it at all. If you stepped off the path from history, things would kind of crumble very easily.
Yeah.
So for Hoi 4, I wanted to build a more flexible AI and then apply a layer of control over it to get the history instead. So that's sort of what focus trees and stuff are. They kind of direct Germany a certain direction, right? But under the hood of that is still an AI that will do choices and things like that. Whereas in Hoi 3, we just had the control layer, essentially. So that's sort of how it started off on a top level for the AI. Some of the biggest problems have definitely been things like front lines, invasions. What makes Hoi 4 harder than some of the other games we make to do AI for is the fact that if you look at EU4, they can cope with a lot of stuff by having coalitions form, stuff like that, right? In Hoi, a lot of conflicts are one nation to one nation, right? You wouldn't want to have every unit in the American army and the UK army just transfer over to the Russian front, right? And help defend them at the start. Stuff like that. So a lot the AI just have to play a lot better in a 1 versus 1 scenario with the player. And generally players are a lot better than AIs, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, although I was quite happy after usually after every release there's someone going the AI just keeps beating me now, what should I do? Which always
that's probably me. So one thing I wanted to ask you, because there was a lot of changes going from Hearts of Iron 3 to Hearts of Iron 4, and there's been 2 diehard questions. I'm going to ask the first one, and I'll kind of ask the other one later. Mm-hmm. The biggest one that I wanted to ask was, in Hearts of Iron 3 to 4, there was a in Hearts of Iron 3, there was a state militia unit. It was kind of like the equivalent of the Home Guard in England and the State Defense Force in America. And I noticed when Hearts of Iron 4 came out, there was that was kind of removed. So there's no state militia unit. So I was kind of curious, what the reason behind that was.
It was a simplification thing. We wanted to not have too many different unit types at the game, when we launched the game, to make it easier to learn it. Because at its very core, a militia is just a less equipped regular infantry unit, right? When you're playing with it. And you could, for people who wanted that, you could still do it, right? You could deploy them as soon as you could, training-wise, and give them a template that doesn't use anything but the oldest equipment, and they don't have any fancy support stuff like artillery, anything like that. You can make them smaller as well. Hoi 3 sort of had this thing where you could scale your division sizes, right, in like 4 or 5 steps. But there's a lot more like granularity in Hoi 4 with that, right? You can have single battalion divisions and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So we felt that we pretty much covered it. I do agree that it is slightly different, right, to have a militia. But we felt at the time it wasn't really different enough to warrant like adding one more unit type for people to like get their heads around.
Because I know in the US, like the first time I remember picking up Hearts of Iron 4, and I remember like seeing Army, and then I know the National Guard divisions were kind of you could form National Guard divisions, and you had the name like National Guard. But I know in the US, like they have state defense forces. I know they have Home Guard in England. They were just basically stateside. And I use those units a lot, mainly because, like, for example, if you're the US and you're deploying all your active duty forces, Army, National Guard, and active army overseas, I always worry that like the Japanese or the Germans would literally just like show up out of nowhere. Because there was a couple of times that actually happened. Oh, yeah. And so I would have the state militia units kind of be like cannon fodder and just have them kind of like do a delaying tactic on the Germans or the Japanese. So they were kind of useful. And I'm kind of curious, would I be able to mod that into the game? Is that a possibility?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's definitely possible, I would say.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna have to do that.
I mean, there might already be mods for it, actually. I haven't really looked.
Yeah, if there's one thing about Paradox games is that they're very mod friendly.
Yeah, actually, I would like to say a thing about that, because that was one of my main motivations as well for Hoi 4, which I was really sad the Hoi 3 didn't get the same modding scenes as Hoi 2 did. For example, like really big old history mods like Kaiserreich never really dug into Hoi 3. So we put a lot of effort actually into making sure that Hoi 4 was a lot more moddable. I think like last time we checked, yeah, there was like, I don't know, like probably like 16,000 mods or something like that.
Wow.
There's probably more actually. That was like early last year. I last checked the total count actually.
That's insane.
Yeah, I just Googled here. There's a mod for militias that exists. I think you can find it if you want. There's a lot of ways to tailor Hoi for your personal preferences, right?
I'm gonna have to do that. I should have thought of a mod. I figured it didn't click in my head. Somebody probably already made it, and I kind of did the work for me, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at players, about 60% of all the players we have use mods. Like, it's really common.
Wow, I didn't know it was 60%. I thought most people play vanilla. Like, I know I always play vanilla, like probably 95% of the time.
Yeah, I mean, the majority still plays sort of vanilla. Like, it's mostly cosmetic mods and stuff like that. If it's just total conversion mods, it's a much smaller percentage than that. But
do you ever find yourself playing these total conversion mods, Dan?
I do sometimes for inspiration, like, you know, see what ideas people came up with, right?
Yeah, that's good.
It's sometimes just fun. I'm going to make the team play the My Little Pony mod.
Yeah, the Equestria one. That's funny. That was the one I was going to ask you about.
They put so much effort into it. It's insane.
It's very impressive.
Next week at the surprise. Because we do like a weekly multiplayer session. So.
I never actually do any of the total conversion mods. I always feel like I kind of play vanilla because I feel, honestly, you guys already add so much to this game. I mean, I'll be honest. The Man the Guns DLC that you guys came out with was pretty epic. You know, like the ship design. I mean, you literally overhauled the entire naval aspect of the game. And when I started playing it, I was like, wow, this feels like almost the entire game tacked on to another game.
Yeah, I mean, I think I got some gray hairs during the development of that. It was very, very ambitious, probably a little too ambitious. There was so much stuff. But it's difficult, right? Because I really, really wanted to pass over each of the types of warfare. And we'd done land, we sort of done air, although not to the same level. And then if I wanted to add things to naval, I just really wanted to change up like the core of it, because I was never really happy with how the pacing felt and how the combat felt and stuff like that. and how you did the, you basically, if you were big naval nations, right, you just plonked down your navy in an area and then forgot about it, right? Or you used it to lure the AI's fleet out and just whack them once and then they were gone, right? So there was a lot of stuff to do with naval. And previously, all the focus that we've done on development have been very focused on the land side, because it's the most important side, right? The other armed forces in the navy and stuff, they're just there to support your land conquests, really, right? Because if you don't have boots on the ground, you can't really do anything substantial other than slowly wear people down strategically, right?
I think most people I talk to, it's my own personal opinion, is that Man the Guns is by far the best DLC that's been released for Hearts of Iron 4. It was so standout. Not even to say that the other ones weren't good quality. It's just it was wonderful. And Hearts of Iron has always had this question hanging over it, what role is the Navy going to play in the game? For reasons you already mentioned, that people kind of didn't take it too seriously, or they didn't feel it was as immersive. And I feel like I honestly don't even know how much you've changed with the ship combat. I can see that it's different, right? I can see that the ships are lining up differently. The screens are doing different things than they used to in Hearts of Iron 3 and in the first beginning naval system in Hearts of Iron 4. But the biggest thing for me is just the ship design is so different, that the way you build the ships and stuff, that by itself, even if you hadn't changed the battle system, would have made the naval system already great. Because you kind of get more attached to ships when you put a little bit of effort into designing them, and you just want to see how your creations do. And even if I don't even know what's going on in the battles, I just want to know, is my new design, is it working or not? So it's really a rewarding system that you've implemented.
They do go a little hand in hand though, because you don't want to design your perfect ship and it just dies when you're looking away either, because the combat is over. And
yeah, of course. That'd be
combats, right? They were either super long or very tiny and things like that. So we tried to normalize that a bit, and also specifically make sure that ships survived a lot more. In the old system, they generally died, right? And we wanted to create the system where they took a lot of damage and had to be repaired instead, so that you actually did get a chance to see your big creations do stuff, right?
Yeah, and that might be good for the AI too, so that this, as you were saying, it used to be about. It kind of it might even still to a degree be this way, because with the retreat system, I've seen it where you can kind of capture the AIs or anybody's retreating fleet and just but you don't really want it to be a one-time blow, because then the suspense is really going out of the room.
Yeah,
you no longer have this
a lot of motions and focus onto designing your ships, right? And you want to be able to see them more than once.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of the DLCs, how is all that working right now? Though I have all the DLCs, and as I said, I love the Man the Guns one. But for anybody else out there who are hopefully already own the Man the Guns DLC, and if they don't, they should go get it right now. But if they were interested in knowing how the DLCs all play together, Paradox has a tradition of having a lot of DLC now, and that the free version, like the non-paid version, is also updated. So they do this very elaborate system of upgrading. How well do you guys, or how much effort even is it to try to balance all these things? It sounds like doing any kind of version control on a version which is only going to have one version is difficult enough. How do you guys manage that with this branching path of different possibilities people can play with?
Yeah, it's very difficult actually. And I worked on Hoi Free, where we just, there was only one version. When we released an expansion, there was no more patches for anything before that, right?
Yeah.
Problem with that is you're kind of forcing people to keep buying the new stuff, which from a business sense sounds like something you would want to do, right? But it's not really, because you kind of wear people out, and you want to be nice to your customers, or they're going to just leave you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to have a model where we could still give people new updates to keep the game interesting, even if you didn't happen to have like enough money to buy the expansion just that month or something, right? Everybody has slightly different budgets and things like that. And I think even back then it was also like more of a piracy is not as big anymore, but it was pretty big back then. So, you know, if you make things worse than when you can steal it, then, you know, it's hard to do that, right? So, anyway, back to the thing. It's definitely something we have to spend a whole lot of effort to think about. And often things will miss certain combinations as well, which can be tricky, especially among the focus trees, because there are just like basically infinite permutations of how things can connect to each other. And we do try to test with like with and without mods, with and without DLCs and stuff like that. But there's usually something that we miss. So the way we try to tackle this is more from like a design perspective, where we make sure that the features that go into the expansion, the paid part of the expansions, right? Because we tried to go for about 50-50. I think it was Man Guns was like 56% paid, 44% free, or something like that. But we try to make sure that those features are separate enough that they can operate, like the basic systems can operate, so we don't have to maintain like two different AIs, for example. We do script special AI strategies and like things like that, where we direct the AI in certain ways differently if you have expansions or not. But like the core systems all need to function like easily plug in with expansion stuff. So, for example, right, you can have the AI do all of the naval stuff, and it doesn't need to do ship designing, right, necessarily with the new system, because the ships just operate basically the same way, right? There's a few exceptions, like mining and things like that, but there is still a minor part. So as long as you don't have to keep developing like two different AIs to deal with it, or even worse, like two different interfaces for something, those are like my big two blockers. Like if I have to make two different AIs or two different interfaces for something, it just basically, it's got to be free or we can't do it, basically.
Yeah, well, it makes sense from an AI perspective, because I, again, still think that AI is the most difficult part of any development project. So
it's also like one of the most important parts of a game, because it's essentially what the game, when you have a Paradox game, right, you're not playing against like a script made by someone, right? It's not like a movie, or like if you look at Call of Duty or something like that, right? That's like it's a laid out experience for you. But in like our strategy games, it's all relies on like AI agents, right? And they have to kind of behave in a good way. And essentially, what the game is like your interactions with the AI, right? It wouldn't be very fun to stomp Russia if the unity stood there, right? So how they play and how they interact is an incredibly important part of the experience.
So jumping off the combat system, I wanted to ask you, you guys recently released Imperator, which personally, I love that game. I literally play it night and day, and it's on my mind all the time. And one of the key systems that you guys have in Imperator is a battle tactics system, where you can change between, I believe, like going all out attack, or you can kind of like lure the enemy in. So you can kind of like choose recon and defensive and all out attack. And I was kind of curious, as I was playing this, I was like, would such a system work in a Hearts of Iron type of game?
So, I mean, we do have a bit of a tactic system, right? But it's mostly there to kind of give more advantages to higher general levels and kind of incentivize doctrine progression, and add a little bit of sort of story bit to combats. Because Hoi combats without tactics are basically, there's very little actual random chance in them. So the tactics add most of the randomness to the actual combats. And we wanted to have specific things, so you can go like, oh, actually, in this province here, we're fighting across a river, so there's going to be a bridge thing where, it's going to be make it harder and easier depending on your traits, stuff like that. The reason we haven't done that more interactively, and in Hoi 3, actually, I played around with it. If you remember, you could set like a slider on your or your HQs, where you could say how aggressive you wanted them to be, and that actually affected the tactics picking as well. So if you went for high aggressiveness, it would pick more reckless tactics that, you would take more casualties, but you generally did a bit more damage as well. So we did have a little indirect thing, but the problem is in Hoi, right? You say you're attacking Russia, you got 300 divisions. So you could be looking at like a ton of combats at once, right? And you can't go in there and like make a choice in each one. It would be impossible. Like, just way too much overload for the player to try and manage that, right? So it has to be an indirect system in Hoi, I think. It's very different from a game like Imperator, where you're going to have like 2 stacks of units or something like that, right? And you're probably primarily focusing on like your main army, right, for this kind of stuff. I could see stuff like this being done. Initially for Hoi, my plan was to tie that into the planning system. So that way you could kind of like draw up ahead of time what kind of tactics you wanted to use. But that was never something I had time to test out. But I think definitely like having it be like a choice on a unit level for each combat that's way too much for Hearts of Iron. I think even in Hoi 2, it'd probably be almost too much to deal with.
So you're thinking more of like the Grand Army scale?
Yeah. I mean, I think you can definitely have it, but it needs to be indirect, right? So you go like, well, actually, I want more aggressive tactics in this area, so I will pick a general who is aggressive, something like that.
Nice. I like that. Kind of going off that, I wanted to ask you one question, and this was one thing that I saw in Hearts of Iron 2, and since we were mentioning kind of like the invasion of Russia, where Germany had multi-nations kind of participate. So there was a key feature that was in Hearts of Iron 2 that I noticed it wasn't in Hearts of Iron 3 or brought into Hearts of Iron 4. It was a diplomatic option that affected the military side, and I think it was called Assume Command of Allied Armies. It was kind of like an Eisenhower option, where like if I'm the U.S., I can command the UK, French armies, and kind of move them, kind of like if they were part of my own nation. And I noticed like it was in Hearts of Iron 2, and it was just kind of taken out of the following 2. So I was just kind of wondering if was that for like a technical or like an engine reason?
It was for various reasons, actually. So one reason for this is if you can just take all the AI's units, it's a very, very tough decision for the AI to decide. They essentially like potentially suicide their nation, right? Because like, oh, I have no defense, no army, nothing. And so that's one side. You can open up serious problems for the AI, and then people expect them to be able to deal with it anyway, right?
Yeah.
The other part of it is immersion. There's this even Eisenhower, right, didn't have full control over everything, right? I mean, he had control over a lot of stuff, but there's still national controlled stuff. And for me, like, this is almost like a cop-out, because it does mean that it's always best if the player directs everything, right? Obviously, because they're better than the AI. So you would never really get the feelings where like Italy is a bit of a fuck up and things like that, right? Where you have to go save them rather than like assume direct control over everything. Italy's funny, by the way. It's like, I always try to be careful with like when I talk about nations, because there's a lot of pride.
Oh God, I can see where this is going.
But I never get that for Italy. It's like I talk to Italians and they're like, "Yeah, I know." Like it was a clusterfuck, right?
Okay, that's good.
But like, I never really get that for anyone else. But everybody in Italy is kind of like, "Yeah, it wasn't handled very well," and like Mussolini scrambled in to try and get a piece of the cake. And so for me, it's a bit of an immersion thing like that, because you would essentially force the player to control every other nation for optimum performance otherwise. So there's got to be like a give and take. For Man the Guns, actually, we expanded into this a bit in a way I think is kind of a good trade-off. So if you're not familiar with it, the way it works is that you can set up a plan and an army group, essentially, and then you can request troops from multiple nations to it. This is sort of your Eisenhower option, right? It goes like, okay, we're going to rock D-Day, so I'm going to make a couple of invasion plans, and then I'm going to request units from other nations. And the way this works better is because the AI will actually know what you're trying to do a bit, so you can gauge like how much it should send you, what makes sense, and it can be a bit more generous with its troops. It doesn't have to be so conservative. So because it can see that you're trying to do an invasion, it can, if it has Marines, send those instead of something else, and primarily knows which enemy you're trying to target. Because another problem can be like, well, actually, like, I need my units to fight Russia, but actually Germany has a much smarter idea how to beat Russia somewhere else. So if they're requesting troops to fight Russia, I know that I can be a bit more free with giving them to Germany in this case. So it just gives context for the AI how to evaluate things. I think it was a decent compromise between control everything and like not control anything. Not super visible, right? You have a little button next to the army group to make like a allied request thing. There's also at the bottom of every army you can request in extra units to it. But it only works if you actually have, like, you need to actually have a plan so it knows who you're going for, or you know what the role is going to be.
Yeah, I gotta try that out.
It's that kind of planning system seems like it could feed very well into any kind of intelligence updates, which might or might not be coming in the future. Like if you're setting up a plan and asking allies to lend supplies or lend to armies or whatever, it seems like well, that might be vulnerable to espionage missions.
We've talked a long time about having like visible plans to the enemies and stuff like that. It's tricky because if it's too easy to do it, nobody's going to draw their plan, right? They're going to draw some random plan just to get planning bonuses and then changing it in the last moment, right? So it's like against the AI would work, but the AI is fairly predictable when it comes to planning, right? Because you know it's going to roughly how it's going to do an attack anyway. Maybe not invasions, though. Invasions are very tasty information to know exactly where they're going to be hitting, right?
Yeah, that's actually what I was thinking about, this D-Day thing, which, you know, was such a big deal in real life, how they took such... I mean, they actually did what you said. They drew up fake plans and then switched them at the last moment. Or at least compared to... at least that's what the Germans saw.
Yeah, pretty much.
Plans, so.
Surely they don't just put Patton in a field. But yeah, it's an interesting thing, actually. We did a thing we called the 3-Day War 2 weeks ago now, which is like a multiplayer thing with a bunch of influencers. And I was in the casting team, so I was sitting there commentating, and like we noticed that so in this game, it wasn't quite World War II. It was a different setup. So Poland and Germany was actually allied. And Poland's job was essentially to be the defense of Germany's like big spear thrust. So they would guard the coastline and stuff. And they had accidentally forgotten to change one of his templates. So you had one division that was a single battalion in this whole coastal defense. And everywhere else there was like strong divisions defending the coastline. Unfortunately, and we were like sitting there waiting for UK to find this spot, but they never really... They were like very close to it, but there's not really, it's not easy to get information for that, right? And I think that's one of the things that Hoi 4 kind of lacks at the moment. There's very little play to get better intel, like the really basic technologies for encryption, decryption, but there's not a whole lot of ways to gain intel and intel advantages as it is now.
Well, speaking of potential things in the future, I've been asked to ask. It seems like everybody wants to know: is it possible? Is it possible to get customizable tanks? Because I guess everyone just so loves this Man the Guns DLC. Is there any news on whether or not tanks will be also something that you can design like this?
I think it would be possible. We talked about it a bit, but it was way too much to do at the same time.
Yeah, if it's too complicated, then I understand that. I only know that apparently there's a lot of enthusiasm for it, much more than I expected.
Yeah.
So
I feel like it's probably a thing we'll do eventually. Personally, I think designing aircraft is a bit more interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
And on how we ended up with the tech trees, because it just doesn't fit a lot of nations. Like the tech tree sort of fits Germany, but like not really America, and it's it's like these very shoehorned in categories. It's got to be a dual engine plane to be a long distance fighter and stuff like that, right? It doesn't quite mesh with reality, and you are forced to have a bit too many planes, which is also a bit unfair. Where you have to do all this research, but actually you could develop a very like multi-role plane instead, and that option isn't really there at the moment, right?
Yeah.
There's also like this whole thing about night fighters and things like that, but it's just not in the game at all at the moment. And that's mainly because I think it needs to be smaller choices that aren't just like a big research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I just think that I know I'm more of a naval guy myself, so that the man the guns already basically hit the spot for me. But if other people are more tank people or airplanes people, I could see them just going nuts over any kind of design system built for them.
Oh yeah, so. I think it would be really cool to have designers for all of the systems, really, right? I mean, you have very basic designers now, right? You can add in 4 different stats. But
yeah, that's right.
It's a very different thing, right?
Yeah, and I think you already touched on it too. The different aircraft, it's true. It's not something I really was able to put into words or even had the isolated thought in my brain until you said it. But it always felt a little bit. Actually, you would look at the trees for the current aircraft technology, and you'd be like, you kind of like you question. You're like, oh, well, what if this one should be there instead? Maybe it should be this aircraft in this position at this time. You know, yeah. So
it's a lot of like square pegs in round holes when it comes to some of the technology choices for air. We try to improve it, but it's a difficult thing. It's a little bit similar with tanks, where it's like, is it heavy? Is it light? Every different nation had a completely different like standard for what's a light and heavy tank. Like a heavy tank in Italy is like a medium tank in Germany.
Yeah.
Like that. So it's mostly about the role they have, but that's not super intuitive to people. So,
one thing I wanted to ask you: the ship system, the ship design system that you had in Man the Guns. One thing that kind of popped in my head is what it would be really great for would be kind of like a Cold War or modern day era game, mainly because I think there was a previous game I think that Paradox was working on. I think it was like East versus West that had kind of like a similar naval system where you kind of like have ships that go through refits and you can kind of, I think, add like enhancements to like aircraft carriers and such. So one kind of thing that I was kind of wondering is it possible to have the Hearts of Iron 4 engine have like be used in a Cold War kind of scenario? Like, what are your thoughts on like extending Hearts of Iron into like a Cold War?
I think it's tricky, and I don't want to talk too much about East versus West because it wasn't like an internally developed title, right? We licensed the engine. I think one of the reasons it didn't work out though was the fact that I don't think Hearts of Iron, which is a pure war game, is like the perfect base to build what is essentially like not a war game, right? Because the whole point of a Cold War is that you don't actually fight directly, right?
Yeah, it's political.
Yeah. I do see the possibility of time extension into Cold War area, but then it would be probably more set up for being like Cold War goes hot kind of situation. Maybe Korea escalates, things like that, right?
I think you guys had something in Hearts of Iron 2. I think you had a
I was gonna say they just need to call one DLC Doomsday and the next one Armageddon.
Those were epic. I remember playing those, I think, and it was about like I think you could use nukes. It was kind of like World War III, I believe, right?
Yeah, and I mean you can't. It just has to happen early enough because when people have a world-destroying arsenal of nukes, nobody really can go to war and win, right? But Korea area, like there's nukes going around, but there's not the amount of nukes that they later would accumulate. So I think in those areas you could still have nukes being a thing. We'd have to do something more fun with nukes. They're not super great at the moment. I mean, they work, and they work like tactical nukes a little bit as well. Like if someone has a very strong defense, but the problem is it's not really what people imagine when they're thinking about nukes, right? So I think it would be interesting to extend the timeline, but you shouldn't expect a Cold War, like pure Cold War game where it's like,
Actually, the mods have done a pretty good job with that already. I remember playing a Cold War mod, and it's probably the main one, and it was actually pretty satisfying. Every now and then, you do want to play that, like, what if, like, what does this Hearts of Iron game look like? I mean, if you like Hearts of Iron 4, it's kind of fun to just put that scenario in. What does the Cold War look like? But yeah, as you said, the difficulty is that Hearts of Iron 4 is a war game and you want to go to war, but the whole premise of Cold War is if you go to war, you already lost. So,
I mean, you're also going to need a lot more other things, I think, to properly do things like the Vietnam War. You have to have a lot more detailed internal politics stuff to make that interesting. Like, why not commit more forces? And also, like, when you have a guerrilla war like that, it doesn't really mesh with what Hoy is designed to do, which is to have this sort of like blitzing, land grabbing thing, right? So you'd probably need to develop something slightly different to cope with proxy conflicts and things like that.
Yeah, no, I think asymmetric warfare, which becomes like the dominant force, the dominant way warfare is conducted after World War II, or after Korea War, I guess. It's not as good. Hearts of Iron isn't set up for that either.
No.
I interviewed Troy Goodfellow a couple of episodes ago, and he kind of shed his idea on what would have been a good, like, Cold War era game, because I was kind of comparing it to East versus West, and he was mentioning how, like, the Cold War, there was so many dynamics in it. Espionage, you had like corporations, the economic system. Like, he went totally into it, and as he was describing it, I was like, that should be the Cold War era game. Like, he hit the nail on the head right there. And so yeah, I totally agree.
It would definitely be cool to do a Cold War era game. It's just very difficult, and it's also kind of a bit outside of our comfort zone, because when you're doing a Cold War game, like, if you're thinking traditional play any nation, right? It's only really two, say three big playable nations in a Cold War game, right? Imagine the options you have as America or Russia compared to, say, Venezuela, right? It's almost like it would be more interesting to have a Cold War game where, like, US and Soviet are almost like they're not playable nations. They're like big forces, and the game is more about like how you get the most out of the Cold War, right?
Oh, that's a great.
Otherwise, you're essentially almost making two different games. It's a bit of a departure from our play anything, because the setup and the way it works, and there's no wars. Then, like, it would be very hard to make like a third faction or something to rival the US or the Soviet Union, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's totally right. Setting up a game where you can kind of like have the US and the Soviet Union kind of compete, and you can kind of see how far ahead you can get. That would be a really cool scenario. That would be a really cool game. For me, that would be an instant buy. Any Cold War era game that you guys would make, it would be instant buy for me.
Yeah. And I mean, I can see the fun in playing, say, an African warlord or something that is like trying to cash in on this. Because there was a lot of people exploiting the conflict, right? Just to go like, well, we'll support your side if we get a bunch of support, right? And then basically played off the big sides, right, as well. So I think that there's potential in it. It's just it's probably quite a difficult game to do. I think do it well.
I guess for me, like the one thing I was always envisioning is like if you have like conflicts that are kind of like escalating in the world, like if you have something that's going on in Israel between the Palestinians and Israel, you can kind of react with like military force or political pressure or diplomatic, and kind of handle conflicts as the years go by one at a time, and kind of choose your way to handle it. Do you send a naval task force, or do you use diplomats? And I was always kind of like interested in more of that aspect, how to de-escalate conflicts.
Yeah.
John, I would actually say that you really should check out this mod. I actually pulled it up. It's called Cold War Iron Curtain, A World Divided. And I think that you may find something you really like about that. I mean, just to kind of speaks again to the Hearts of Iron 4 mod community.
I had time to play that one. It's on my list.
Yeah, it was very enjoyable. I mean, as I said, it's interesting that you kind of touched on some of the things. If you go to war, I think that the one thing about Cold War mods or Cold War games that it's hard to take seriously the world blowing up in the light that it should be taken when it's just a game, and people just we just don't care, right? We don't care that we blew up the world. Oh, well, let me just push the AI to the point where they could go to war just so I can get this one extra province or something. And then, oh, they blew up? Okay, I'll just complain to the game developers. We don't really have the sense that you should really try to avoid that. So it's a tough thing.
It would need like an ending screen where it actually like plays out. Is it called DEF CON? If you guys tried it's like in real time. I think it's called DEF CON. Anyway, it's like you could score like because once the nuclear holocaust hits, it would be hands off essentially, and you could go like, well, actually, you fucked up and lost the game because you did this action.
Oh god, I can't remember. There's a game that does that. I can't remember which one it is. Not DEF CON, but there's another game where when you go to war, when you actually provoke nukes, they actually just cut to the end and they say, we're not even going to reward you with an end screen because we're not going to even give you the satisfaction. We're just going to tell you game over. Yeah, I don't know, which is, I think, done well because we're a little too careless with digital lives.
I mean, it can also be fun if you kind of downplay the world is destroyed aspect. You can imagine this, right? I'm playing, say, because it's conveniently far away, Australia, right? And I've got my little like Pacific Empire going with a couple of puppets and stuff like that. And Soviet Union and America wipe each other out. Now there's a big power vacuum, right? You could play like that and go like real sort of like it knocks out those big countries, and that opens up like a lot more dynamic world. We have a rise and fall and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of talking about the future here. I kind of see. I'm really happy that you mentioned civilization at the beginning of the podcast because I'm starting to think of Hearts of Iron as kind of a new civilization. I mean, it seems to be becoming that new genre-leading giant that just keeps turning out one impressive market dominator after another. So I don't know. I mean, it sounds like there's still a little bit of, I would say even a lot of fuel left in the tank for Hearts of Iron 4, but have you guys already thought about making Hearts of Iron 5? And to follow the civilization analogy, can we expect hexes and stack limits?
I don't know. Like it's interesting. Like there's several ways to go about it. I mean, Hoi almost has hexes, right? Because provinces are there for movement. They're not historical borders or historical provinces anyway, right? They're just there as a way to split up states for maneuverings. It's almost like it has hexes, right?
Yeah, I mean, this was a joke because Civilization 4 was square, and then Civilization 5, they moved to hexes, and then they made it so only one military unit, so they had these stacking limits. So that's why I make this joke. But
well, no, but it's interesting. Actually, Hoi 3 had hexes at the beginning because Johan, when he was gonna make the map, like we took, I think the wiki map, and then like he coded up a Python script that generated hexes across it, and that was like our starting point for stuff.
Huh. That's interesting. You can actually kind of see it too.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. This must have been. Was this like? Did you kind of keep these around the German? I don't remember, but yeah.
I think places. I think you can notice them in like Sweden and stuff like that. The like the base shapes that were there. We went around, adjusted a lot of them. Especially along fronts to other nations and stuff like that. But,
I see. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it's sort of become like a pretty big name. So I don't see us not doing a Hoi 5 eventually. I still have stuff that I have from my original plan back in ages ago that I still want to do with Hoi 4 though before I start thinking too much into Hoi 5. That's also the thing where it's like each game needs to be pretty different to be interesting, right? You can't just go like Hoi 5 is Hoi 4 with pretty graphics, right?
Well, it depends on if you're a civilization or not.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, those are still a little bit different, I think. Some of them more than the others, right?
Yeah, I think 5 and 6 weren't necessarily so similar. I mean, weren't necessarily so different, and that they probably had, they had a little bit of backlash about that, I believe. So,
yeah. But for me,
I'm happy. Please continue developing Hearts of Iron 4.
For me, I don't see a reason why you would want to play Hoi 5 instead of Hoi 4, right?
Uh-huh.
So it would have to be different in some way. All the different Hearts of Iron games were kind of designed by different people as well. So it's I think that's one way of getting a different feeling to them. I don't know. I mean, I have ideas for sure for Hoi 5, but as I said, I still have a couple of things to do for Hoi 4 that I think are like important to realize like the full vision of it.
Very good.
Yeah, but it's something that we bring up in small discussions and go like, oh, how could we do this thing?
Kind of curious, since we were talking about Hearts of Iron 2 and kind of Hearts of Iron 4, there was something that I remember thinking back to Hearts of Iron 2. I remember there were like Easter eggs in Hearts of Iron 2. I remember there was something where you can type in a command and aliens would land or something like that. I remember, and they would try to like take over the world.
Yeah, and a little rowboat as their navy as well.
I never saw this, by the way. This is now totally news to me. I may have to find my Hearts of Iron 2.
I don't remember the command, though. Do you know what it was?
No, I totally forgot. But I remember when you initiate the command, they would show up in one of the provinces. I think you could even specify the province, and they would just kind of be like Independence Day, where they just kind of spread out and destroy everything.
I mean, if you want it, there's a mod I think that injects like alien-controlled communist dolphins into the game.
What the heck?
But yeah, we haven't done any Easter eggs like that. I was gonna say yet. We do have a couple of Easter eggs though, and the one we sort of been building on in every expansion is this idea that like there's a tiny chance that Hitler fakes his death, and like there's somewhere else, right? So in Waking the Tiger, you got Mr. Hilt showing up with his slightly, you can tell in his tan that he's shaved his mustache off down in South America, and Hitler can show up gray-haired as a fascist politician in America as well.
Oh wow!
The chances are very small for these things to occur, so I mean it can happen. We also have the like chains of events that are they're so multi-stage that they're almost like Easter eggs, right? Being able to form like the HRE and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I wonder if somebody found those Easter eggs. I wonder if like it was like some gamer that actually found it and it was like, holy crap, this isn't a game.
I mean, probably. I think a lot of people go through files as well and like go, wait, why is there like a bunch of corgi advisors for the UK? That's another Easter egg, by the way. Because if you remember historically, right, the royal family refused to leave the palace on the bombing. So in Hoi, there's like a chance that they die, and Elizabeth takes over, right? And she's still pretty young, and like this is a shaking experience, and she's not as strong as a person yet. So, but she can start picking up like the different we actually researched her corgis and put them in as like advisors. So if you have all the corgis, that actually offset some of your penalties as being an inexperienced monarch and stuff.
Okay, Dan, now I get it. This is what you meant when you said there's more you need to put into Hearts of Iron 4. I get it. There's a lot more work that needs to be done on this.
I mean, we haven't done the classic Soviet tank dogs yet, right?
Yeah.
No, I meant more like big concepts that I think are still lacking. Several areas I think we could do more interesting stuff. I think, for example, right, and this is more of a long-term thing, but like the supply system did exactly what I wanted it to do for Hoi 4, which was like make it clear where the problem is once you run into a problem and how to fix it. But it doesn't feel right. It doesn't match like the planning aspect that I want to have in the game, where you plan your big war, where you want to have your supply, things like that. So I think that's one of the areas I think I definitely would want to do something more with, because I think it could be quite cool to also sort of plan your logistic train, stuff like that, right? And I haven't quite worked out how to do it yet, but it's one of those areas that is like, it could be a lot more fun here.
Yeah, I saw that was a big simplification from Hearts of Iron 3 to Hearts of Iron 4, and that's actually one of them that you kind of, or at least I, speaking from my own experience, have kind of lost the feeling that supply matters as much in Hearts of Iron 4. I mean, compared to Hearts of Iron 3, which was some people even said it was more a logistical simulator than a war simulator because you really cared about supply, especially in key places like China and North Africa. So
the problem was figuring out how to fix your problems with supply because it was a full simulated like fluid system basically with supply.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When you had a supply problem, you go like, shit, I'm out of supply. And you can't see what's wrong because actually it was 3 weeks ago someone cut off your line and you can't see that anymore. Stuff like that. Because it ran on this sort of time thing, we wanted to change it to basically be an instant thing so you could see the interaction possibilities with it.
Yeah, I think that it was probably overall an improvement just because, I mean, the system you have now it's at least a lot more accessible than the Hearts of Iron 3 system, so I can see the merit in it. But yeah, it sounds like you guys are already thinking about it.
The interaction points, right? You can raid convoys, you can make sure it stops you from putting too many units in the same place, stuff like that. But I just don't think it's super fun, right? I think it could be a lot more fun and involved. Without actually adding complexity as well.
Yeah, that's a challenge. Good luck with that. But yeah, I'd be interested in that. Yeah, because I'm one of those guys who doesn't mind getting into the details, doesn't mind really keeping the supply mode on, seeing the supply move forward. So I'd appreciate those kind of things. So
yeah, I mean, we're trying to target all sorts of people with Hearts of Iron. So I always I always try to think like, is this overloading a player playing on speed 3? Like, do they suddenly have to do twice as much stuff because I added this thing? And then it's probably not a good thing because it can be very annoying to have to deal with things like that if you're, say, at the same time microing a spearhead thrust somewhere, right? Or like and I think that was like one of my basic philosophies with Hoi 4 is like, can the choice be made early? Then let's do it early. So it's more of like a when this happened rather than like, oh shit, when it happened, then I got to do a thing, right? So you can sort of pre-set up your stuff like.
Yeah, as I said, I think it's a good decision to simplify things. I mean, it's going to make it more accessible. That means, with Hearts of Iron 3, you had to really dive deep into some unknown forum to find people who play multiplayer with you. There's certainly no shortage of multiplayer games with Hearts of Iron 4, so that kind of speaks to the success.
Yeah.
In regards to the future of Hearts of Iron 4, in regards to DLCs, I've noticed I think it was Waking the Tiger, you guys added a key functionality for Chain of Command where you can put multiple armies, I think, under the direction of a field marshal.
Yeah.
And I noticed you guys are slowly adding in key functionality that was like in Hearts of Iron 3, I believe. Is there any possibility that you guys might include down the road, bring back the core system where you put individual divisions into cores and then those cores into armies?
I'm not sure. Like, the aspect I'm missing, I think most there, is the ability to have like core assets that affect things, right? I don't think they're necessarily needed for organization. I think the levels we have are okay for that. So if we added them, it would be for like because we need something like core assets. It's like every division would have these big guns, for example, right? But because you have a core HQ around, then it can carry those kind of big weapons to help support several combats or something like that.
Okay.
That's my view on it. Anyway, I think it's fairly okay on the organization now. With 3 levels is probably good enough, I think.
The order of battle system in Hearts of Iron 3 was probably the most tedious part of it. So
it was very cool when you got it set up properly, though. Like
it
was a cool thing where you had all your lines set up perfectly and it was like nicely organized.
But Dan, did you ever do it for the Russians? Did you ever?
Oh yeah, it took like half an hour.
It's so terrible.
Oh, for me, it would take like an hour or two. I literally spent like an hour or two kind of going into individual armies and just kind of like assigning division commanders and corps commanders. I literally sometimes spend an entire night just organizing my military.
Yeah. It was fun, but people would look at you like you're crazy if they knew what you were doing.
Yeah. I think most people had like a prepared save game for Russia already.
Yeah, it makes sense.
regarding the modders, because there's probably going to be a lot of modders that are listening to this podcast. One thing I wanted to ask was people that actually make their own mods, and I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of them. Do you guys hire modders? And if so, what do you guys look for when you guys hire those individuals?
We do hire a lot of modders actually. It's a nice way of knowing if someone can handle the job already, essentially. And you're guaranteed to get people who are passionate about the games and understand the games. It's very different to actually work on a game than to mod a game now. I think a lot of people don't understand the difference. You go like, oh, for example, early on, I think people at this point have gotten how much work it is to make a focus tree. But early on, people go like, whoa, can't we have like 10 focus trees in an expansion? Like I can see these modders knocking them out right in a week. But like, it's never a week. These people spend like all of their free time, and like over a long period of time, it's like modding teams can be like 50 people. And when you have 2 content designers on a team, right, it's a big difference. There's also the aspect of everything needs to work with everything else as well, right? So the quality requirements that we would have actually selling something is way higher than you would do for a mod, for example. But back to your question. We do definitely look for that. We have work tests. It's always good if you've already done a mod or something, because then we can just look at it too. But we always have people do work tests anyway. And the work tests are usually like, we want you to do like a couple of branches of a specific type, like in a focus tree for an example nation, for example, that kind of stuff. I think our old test used to be something about designing like a political branch for Sweden, if I remember correctly. But yeah, it helps a lot if you're a modder. Get up to speed fast. You already know the scripting, which can be quite hard because we use our own custom scripting language, right? So you don't have experience. Like it doesn't help if you worked on like the Unreal Engine or something like that beforehand.
Yeah, I've noticed your engine is so. One thing that really always kind of shocked me is when you guys come out with DLCs or games to begin with, it releases same day for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux.
Yeah.
So in my head is that's really remarkable. That engine you guys have is just it's really like wow, because to customize that game to work across all these platforms, it's really powerful. So I guess the one question I had is, you have it for these 3 different platforms. Is there a possibility that it can port over to the mobile platform for like iPhone or iPad? I noticed a lot of strategy games heading over to that space, like Civilization. Is there a possibility that might actually happen, or it might be even a possibility?
I mean, it could be possible. The problem is really like the complexity. Like you'd have to redesign the games to do it. Right?
Oh.
I mean, maybe on a tablet, especially if it's a big tablet, you might be able to keep the same interface. I don't know if you can also it's possible to redo interfaces, but it's a lot of work, right? You've seen the Stellaris version for console has a different interface, for example, stuff like that. Those things need to happen. I think actually though, Hoi 4 might be well suited to it because you could probably draw plans and things on screen fairly easily, whereas like clicking individual provinces is very difficult. So that might actually help, but like you would have to definitely do something to the game to make it work on those platforms. The complexity needs to go down, not only just because of like CPU requirements, right, but because there's just too many things to deal with on a very small screen.
Now just get this hubbub out of your head. Sean asks this every time, and Matt and I both just poo-poo this question. It doesn't need to be on mobile.
I'm a big mobile guy, so I
mean, from a technical standpoint, right, we could make it work, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's like a great playing experience, right? We did an experiment with EU4. It sort of works, but like performance is a problem. just the sheer amount of stuff in the game is a problem. You would kind of need to redesign them a bit, right? Which I believe Civilization does as well. It's a different game on the tablet, right? Or did they manage to get most of it over now?
I know the graphics were turned down. It's probably about, like, from what I saw, it was about half the graphics of the desktop version.
Yeah.
It is a full game, but it's just those graphics were toned way down.
Yeah. You also have more leeway when you're talking about a turn-based game, right?
True.
Where it's like a real-time experience.
I just feel like I know the devices now are capable. Like the iPad Pro that I have now is more powerful than the MacBook Pro that I use to play Hearts of Iron 4. So I know, like, capability-wise, and this is not even the newest iPad Pro. This is the last year model. So I know, like, the iPads are powerful enough to do it. But like you were saying, it's that whole redesign would take a while, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think it would be cool to play Hoi on my tablet, right? But I think to actually reach a big enough audience that aren't just going to play it on the PC anyway, you would need to change the game a bit. There's also like, I could do that, or I could do Hoi 5 instead, or work on an expansion instead, right?
We don't need that. I don't think this tablet thing. Nobody wants this.
To do things just
He's just talking crazy over here.
No, but it's a cool thing, and it gets brought up a lot because I think there's a lot of us that like have phones and tablets, and I know personally I actually struggle to find good strategy games on my phone. I traditional mobile games don't interest me all that much. I have a couple that I like to play, like I play like King of Dragon Pass and stuff like that, which are sort of strategy games, right? But I wish there was more like deeper experiences with more long-term like stuff going on in them.
Yeah, well, I mean, you never know. In the future, you guys might kind of dabble in there, and I've noticed a lot of companies kind of doing that. You have the Civilization that we talked about, and I know Every Single Soldier, which is the guys that produced Afghanistan 11, and then you have Rome Total War guys bring over their games. So I mean, I've noticed more and more kind of bringing over to the mobile platform, and I noticed they were profitable because Rome Total War came out, then they brought the Barbarian Invasion, and like little by little they kept adding more. So, and I just heard, I think, like, what was the one with the first person shooter with Fortnite? I think it's Fortnite, and then the PUBG one. They just made like buckets of money. I was really surprised by that.
Oh yeah, I mean I think it's doable. It's just not something we have a lot of experience in, right? So. And our games are more complicated than both Civ and Total War, right? So it's
we don't want Hearts of Iron turning into PUBG.
No, me neither. But that was my last question. I was wondering, Eric, did you have any questions that we didn't get to ask yet?
Oh, I'm sure I'll think of 10 things as soon as we finish. But for right now, no, I'm very happy to have had the time. Thanks, Stan, so much for coming on.
Yeah, I just got a question. How come there's no single malt questions?
Oh, yeah, that's the last one, isn't it? Well, it might be a little bit early for you, or we don't know how they do things at Paradox, but one of the questions normally asked is, what's your poison for the evening? I guess maybe it's a little early for you to be drinking.
Yeah, it's morning, so there's a lot of us actually at Paradox that are whiskey fans. Actually, the other day about going over to Edinburgh for the Scottish Malt Whiskey Society in summer. But let's go. Favorite whiskey at the moment, which I bought 2 bottles of like 2 years ago, and I've drunk one now, so I'm not allowed to drink the other one for a couple of years. It's Port Charlotte with the cherry cask one that
Sorry, can you say it again? What was it?
It's a 20-year-old Port Charlotte cherry cask.
Uh-huh.
It's I believe they just reopened the distillery. It's one of those like ones that I found that I just love a lot. My standard one is probably like if I'm not drinking like a single cask or something like that. And to not plug them, but the Scottish Malt Whiskey Society is a great way to actually drink like single cask stuff very cheaply. They do I don't know if you guys are know what they are, but like they basically do their own thing. You don't necessarily know even what distillery the bottle is from unless you look up numbers and stuff like that, and do small batches of stuff, and you can get them like pretty cheap. And in Sweden, whiskey is, because most of our alcohol here is taxed very heavily, so
wow.
more expensive whiskey is like the same price as like Jack Daniels, pretty much, right?
Wow.
It's kind of nuts. So like expensive whiskey in Sweden is the same price as elsewhere generally, sometimes even cheaper. But like the cheap stuff just costs almost as much. Go with a Lagavulin 16 as my go-to. Always works awesomely.
I see. I'm a cheap date, but although I guess it wouldn't be very cheap over there. But I sometimes just use Maker's Mark. It's some American. I don't even know if they have it externally, internationally.
No, they export it. It's a bourbon, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. No, that one's quite nice.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay,
It's
good.
actually kind of hard to find nice bourbon in Sweden. I don't think a lot of the smaller brands are exported. Like, you get like Jack Daniels and Jim Beam and stuff like that. But like some of the other stuff is not really reached out very much. It'd be fun if that gets more popular. Like these days, you're getting a lot of different gins in Europe. So that seems to be like a booming thing. But bourbon hasn't really come to that level yet. Yeah,
I've been drinking Hardywood Tropication. Well, actually, I wasn't drinking it now. I was drinking it before, but I was drinking Hardywood Tropication. It's an American IPA from Richmond, Virginia. I had it recently, and it was really delicious. I was kind of blown away. I usually normally get my Wapo, but I was kind of feeling a little, let's say, adventurous. So I tried a different IPA. I know this is a single malt strategy podcast. I haven't had a Scotch in a while. That's kind of like a contention between me and Matt. I usually get Scotch at the bar, which is probably the worst way you can get Scotch because you literally after 2-3 glasses your bill is $70, which has happened a couple times.
We have some nice. If you ever go to Stockholm, we have some nice. We have a nice local pub where we actually get pretty good prices. Where like everybody from Paradox has gone since like I started back in like 2006 or 7.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, I would never set up a bar near you guys because I would never charge you guys. I would just be like, no, for what you guys do it, no, it's always on the house for you guys. I would go out of business the next day.
We actually did Hearts of Iron beer once. It was pretty fun. We had it was like a Christmas party, I believe, and we did a free. I don't remember which beers. It was 3 different kinds. And we had we had the MacArthur beer and the Zukov beer and who was it? Montgomery, I think, the Montgomery Ale or something like that. So with famous generals on them.
Uh-huh.
That's cool. I would love to. I'm gonna check eBay to see if anybody's selling that stuff.
I think they expired probably at this point.
I would just well, you never know. I'll try to test it out and be like, I'll get sick the next day, but I'm like, hey, I had a Heart to Iron beer and it was worth it.
All right.
That closes us out for this episode. Thank you so much, Dana, for doing this interview, and special thanks to you and your team. You guys are incredible. You guys are absolutely awesome. I love everything you guys do. So continue what you're doing. You guys are our heroes. So thank you, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was great talking to you guys, and I'll pass on the praise to the team. All right.
Thanks so much.
Take care, Dan.
Catch you next time.
Sure.